So guys, as I do every year, I start hundreds, if not thousands of seeds in the greenhouse, and I always experiment with different ideas. And so this year I've tried something a little bit different. I've tried an Amish trick that will absolutely double and triple the size of your plants in the same amount of time. Now this tomato plant here on my left and in my right hand, these two were started by seed exactly the same time, exactly the same method, same watering schedule, the same amount of sunlight in the greenhouse. They were just inches apart in the greenhouse. But what I will say is that I've added one special ingredient to the larger plant here, something that the Amish have been doing for hundreds of years, a trick that you would not believe how effective it is. It's so effective that I would say there's at least 200% more growth in this particular tomato plant. So this takes just minutes to put together. It's made by very inexpensive materials. It's completely organic, and it works better than you could ever imagine. So let's head into the greenhouse. I'll give you another side-by-side demonstration of exactly the difference in plants by taking a ruler and show you how much more growth we've seen out of this plant versus this tomato plant. Now, in case you couldn't see it outside, I'll try to put these a little closer together and take my tape measure or my ruler and show you that this one is at least 200% larger than the one on the left. Although they were both started from seed, these tomato plants have grown quite a bit differently just from this one ingredient we've added to the soil. And I didn't spray it after that. I only added it to the soil when we first started. So as you can see, they were both watered on the same schedule once they began to grow, but I didn't add any of the extra special fertilizer. If you were to do that over a period of weeks, you would see probably even more growth. But I just wanted to do an initial start on the soil sample to see if it made a bigger difference. And it did quite a bit. I've probably got 30 or 40 different experiments in the greenhouse this year. So I'm going to try to make as many of the seed starting videos as possible so we can get through that. But by the time May gets here, most people have already got their plants in the garden. So I'll try to get those out as quickly as possible. But as you can imagine, in the greenhouse and in the garden this time of year, I'm super busy. So I'll do my best to get as many of those experiments out to show you the results on each special formula. So let's move on to the formula. But as you can see, huge difference in growth just from a short amount of time from seed, and only treating in the beginning the soil when the seeds first started. Now the first thing you're going to need is any type of limbs from your yard, from hardwood, not softwood, not pine, things like oak and fruit trees and things like that. So make sure that we're doing this with hardwood. But as you can see, this just came from my fire pit. Now there's a couple of things to remember, that when you're burning limbs, you don't want to allow a rain to come through and wash out all the beneficial minerals from this. If you just wait till after rain happens and it dries out, most of your minerals have been lost to the soil. So what I normally do is I'll take this, add it to a bucket, and then I will filter it out and then put the charcoal in a separate container. But what we're doing is we're trying to make a very fine wood ash. And as you can see from this has already been filtered. It's a very fine wood ash. So that's our first ingredient we're going to need for this type of process. And the Amish, like I said, have been doing this for decades and decades, even centuries. So just remember, our first ingredient is going to be wood ash. Now, if you don't have access to a fire pit, you can order this from Amazon. I ordered this just to see the quality of it, and it's been on the shelf for a couple of years. I don't use this very often because I make my own, but I just want to show you there is an option that if you have a burn ban in your neighborhood, you have a small patio, you don't have room to have a fire pit, you can order the wood ash online and have it shipped directly to you, and it doesn't take a lot. So this will go for multiple seasons on an average sized garden. Now the second item you're going to need is a little bit less common. People don't use this like they once did, but this is molasses. It is unsulfured, and the brand is Blackstrap, and I would recommend ordering this online. Sometimes you can find this at your local grocery store, but this is going to be a huge component of our recipe here. You have to have this to feed our microbes, or our, in this case, it's going to be yeast. And so what you need is you're going to need a small amount of this. This will last for years. You can keep it in the fridge when you need to use it each season. Literally, this could be a multi-year thing that you may not even use up over a period of a decade. But you just want to make sure that you have this and your wood ash. That's our first two components. But I would say that this is really easy to order online. I'll put a link in the description to this and also the wood ash that I just spoke about. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is your water. You want to make sure that you don't use water straight from the tap that contains a lot of chlorine. If it's possible at all to have a rainwater catch, I would do that. I have one just outside the greenhouse. So this is just pure rainwater. If you don't have a rainwater catch, then you need to allow the chlorine gas that's inside of the water to off gas. So you'll just fill up a bucket and wait 24 hours and allow those gases to separate from your water. But again, if it's all possible, use something like this. You could go to the store and buy things like spring water or purified water that has no chlorine in it at all, but it's so much easier just to have a rain catch somewhere around your house near a gutter or anything like that, so you don't have to pay for water by the gallon, especially when you're trying to get this recipe done as cheaply as possible across a large amount of seeds. So I wouldn't even think about purchasing water. I would always use the water from my rain catch. And then second, if I didn't have the rain catch, I would try to separate the chlorine gas from the water by allowing it to off gas. Just fill up a 5-gallon bucket, wait 24 hours, and that should have separated. But you may still have other chemicals in there, so I would recommend number one being the rainwater catch. So the next thing we're going to talk about is your yeast, and it can be any type of yeast that you have, whether it's sourdough starter or anything. Any type of yeast, beer yeast, any type. I prefer this one, this active dry yeast, because I can keep it in the fridge, and each year I can make sure that it's not outdated or not gotten old. I can do a little test to make sure there's still some reaction with sugars and make sure you don't throw away something that's still good. So any type of yeast will work. I'll put a link in the description to this exact brand if it's being sold online, but I prefer this one because I can use it year after year after year. So that's just a few of the items we need, and it's really simple to put together. Now next I'm going to give you the ratios. The first thing we're going to start with is about 1 cup of our sifted wood ash. Now one thing to remember is make sure that you don't use painted wood, any type of pressure treated wood, or any type of coal ash, any type of briquettes from a barbecue. That's one thing you absolutely want to do. You just want this to be made from natural wood ash, which would be limbs, hardwoods. Again, not recommending anything like pine or conifers. We just want to do only hardwoods. Now next we're going to do 1 gallon of our filtered water or rain water that we've caught to our rain catch. And the next thing, we're going to do 1/2 of a tablespoon of any type of yeast. Again, you don't have to use dry yeast. You can use any type that you might have. If you're already into beer making, you'll probably have a lot of yeast on hand. Next, we're going to do 2 tablespoons of molasses. This is going to feed the yeast, and it's going to add a lot of minerals and carbon to our mixture. So we're just going to make sure we do that. And we're going to need a stir stick once we get all of this done. We want to stir it for a good minute to allow our yeast to be well mixed with our sugars, so we'll have a reaction. You'll probably see a lot of foam before you use this. Remember, this is a concentrate, so we're going to dilute this later and make it a little bit weaker. I would say probably 1 cup of our concentrate here to 1 gallon, so it's going to be quite a bit thinner. But just remember, we need to wait 24 hours before we begin. So let's move on to the next step. So once we mix those, we're just going to give it a light stir for about 2 to 3 minutes and allow to make sure that we've mixed our yeast with our sugars to make sure there is that reaction. You're going to see a bubbling kind of foamy thing happening over the next 24 hours. One thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't put an airtight lid on this. Make sure you put some type of cloth or lightly set your lid on there. But I think cloth is actually the better option of those two to allow the reaction to take place. Of course, if you did have an airtight seal, you're going to probably have the lid pop off and maybe some material splash out into everything. So just remember, cloth would be better, something just like an unused towel, bath towel, anything like that. Just drape it over there to allow the breathing and this reaction to take place. Now there is one critical mistake a lot of people make, and that is using water that's really cold. You want to make sure your water is a little bit on the warm side. Maybe around 80 degrees would be optimal. So just make sure that you use a temperature probe and make sure that your water is not cold, because you may not get the reaction you want from the yeast if you're using very cold water from your rain catch. So you might bring it inside and set it next to a vent somewhere in the house and allow the water to reach a little bit warmer temperature to have the proper reaction. So a lot of failure takes place right here at this step because people are using very cold water from outdoors. They caught it in their rain trap. They want to put it directly into their greenhouse or wherever they're starting seeds. And that can be a huge mistake. You want to make sure that your water is, as I just said, on the warm side. Now this is a bucket I've started a couple days ago, and there's like a daily routine you need to do this up to 7 days. The longer you wait, the better the mixture will be and the more potent it will be. But as you can see, there's some bubbles forming there from our reaction from the yeast and the sugars, but just stirring this once a day to introduce some oxygen to help this process take place. If you just take your towel off, do that for about 2 minutes, and then put your towel back on, that's going to help this process go a little bit faster. So just remember that you want to make sure that you're monitoring and making sure it looks normal. You'll see a normal type of bubbling or foam forming. Also, you'll kind of smell a sweet, earthy smell as well. That's perfectly normal. Now, one more note about fermentation is you want to do this if you're wanting it done as quickly as possible. Warmer weather is going to help this, or if you're doing this inside, not in a garage, somewhere is heated. So a normal fast fermentation time would be 5 to 7 days. If you want a stronger mineral extraction, anywhere from 10 to 14 days. Now, if you smell a rotten smell from it, it's kind of a sulfury type smell, you need to add 1 more tablespoon of the molasses to the mixture and stir it in there very carefully. So you may not have put enough sugars in there, and you may have a little bit more of a rotten smell starting. So that's a little bit on fermentation time. Now, once you've completed your fermentation phase, we want to filter this out. And there could be some solids in here. So what you can do, in this case, I'm taking this brewing bag that I've had for many years when I used to make my own beer. But you don't have to use this. You could use something like just an old t-shirt or anything like that. This is our concentrate, and so we can separate any solids that might have been created through that fermentation process, and you can add that to your compost pile. But let's just very carefully filter this through our cloth material here. And so I'll give you the exact measurements on what to mix with water, because you're not going to use this in its pure form. This is your concentrate, but we're going to dilute it in a specific amount of water, and there's different formulations for seeds versus established plants. Now I want to talk about dilution rate and how to apply it to specific plants in certain situations. In the course of doing seedlings, what I did is I took 1/4 cup per gallon of water. That's just a very small amount. So as you can see, that's only about 1/4 cup that I'm adding to the gallon. Now the way I treated the seedlings were, I took a mist sprayer like this, and even before I put the seedlings into the soil, I mist sprayed the soil in its tray like these right here. I did that first, and I allowed it to dry just for a couple of hours. Then I added my seeds in there. If you're doing this with established plants, you're going to use a full cup per gallon and do a soil drench right at the base of each plant. So just remember that 1 cup to 1 gallon on a soil drench once the plant has become established, once you get it out in the garden. Now this solution can raise the pH of the soil, and so I'm going to put a list of things that I do use this on the screen here, of plants that I've had the most success with using this fermented ash formula. And then I'm going to put a second list right here of things that I advise not to use it on, specifically blueberries, because they're not going to like this. So just remember that acid-loving plants are going to be maybe affected by this in a negative way. So we want any type of vegetables that we're growing will do quite well with this formula. Now, as I said, this wood ash formula can raise your pH, and I would recommend getting one of these soil testers. They're really inexpensive, around $20. You can test the pH in your soil right where you're going to be planting, and I would advise testing multiple areas, because you can have different things going on in your garden just feet apart. So just remember to test it before you do that, because you don't want to raise your pH quite a bit higher than if it's already high pH soil to begin with. So as I talked just a second ago about how much you want to add to per gallon of water on established plants, you still don't want to do this weekly. This needs to be about an every 2-week process of adding this to the soil, not more than that. Once a week would be too much. I think it might change your pH and could be detrimental to the plant itself. Another thing to remember is don't spray the leaves themselves. When you're adding it to an established plant already in the garden, or one that you have in a larger size pot, only do the soil drench method and avoid applying it directly to the leaves. I wanted to give you one more close-up of these two plants so you could see exactly what this misting did on the initial stages at the seed starting point. This fermented wood ash, and the Amish have discovered this through centuries of trial and error, This is going to soften the mineral impact. It's going to add microbial life. It's going to reduce the salt burn risk. And it also, the most important thing, is going to improve the nutrient uptake of each plant as it grows. So that's really an incredible benefit to something that's so easy to put together. And as you can see, it makes a huge difference in growth and ultimately the yield of your plants. Whether you're growing tomatoes, squash, cucumbers, whatever it might be, you're going to have a much more productive garden mid-season. Now I wanted to give you another tip that's really critical if you want to have the maximum benefit of the yeast in this water. As I mentioned, stirring it once a day can help increase the oxygen inside there and help produce a much better result. But if you take an aquarium pump, and you can get these so cheap, they're only like $10 or $15, put one in your bucket and have it running 24 hours a day, and you'll see a huge increase of the yeast production and the microbial life growing in there. So again, a aquarium pump for the yeast is going to make a big difference as well. They're not expensive, and you can use it over and over each season, and you'll see the results right away. So I did discover that one of the buckets where I put the aquarium pump in there, I saw a much more noticeable yeast growth. There was at least an inch of foam at the top as compared to a very light amount in the other bucket. So just remember, an aquarium pump, I'll put a link in the description if you don't have one, but again, they're really cheap and they'll make a huge difference in the overall result. You'll probably have results even better than these two. So guys, this Amish trick has been around, as I said in the beginning of the video, for decades, if not centuries, and the process has changed very little because bread baking and things like that have always required yeast. The Amish have always found ways to innovate and make their gardens more productive because this is how they live. They don't normally use their local grocer. They grow their own groceries, at least the produce, that is. So try this. I think you'll be amazed at the results. Guys, I really appreciate you watching. If you'd like to see additional content, I have a Patreon. I'll link that down below. If you have a comment or question, I hope you'll become a public subscriber first. I tend to put those questions and comments to the front of the line. I get a lot of comments each day, so I'm not able to read everything as it gets up into the hundreds and hundreds per week. And as you can see, I have a lot of greenhouse duties to do over the next 30 days. So guys, I really appreciate you watching. Have a great day.